Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Alumni Reunion, day of presentations. Hopefully you've been watching along with us all today, and that you were praying with us during Vespers last night, and also watching the Alumni Association meeting. I know that Jared here was also as well, so I'm glad we have some great alumni to be a part of this in these crazy times. Again, I'm Joe Oliveri. I'm the alumni director here at St. Meinrad. Just welcome to everyone for these presentations. Just know a couple of things. We have a chat feature here. It's kind of like a webinar that we're doing today, where once I'm done with the introduction, Jared will take over the screen. He'll give his presentation. But in the meantime, you can also use the chat to say, who you are, where you're from, what your alumni class is, and also any questions that kind of come up as Jared's giving his presentation today. Also know that this talk will be replayed, so you can always come back to it again and watch it. And we'll make sure that we have the contact information for Jared he can get back to with any other questions that he maybe missed. And if you have any larger technical difficulty problems, you can email us at alumni@stmeinrad.edu, and we'll take care of you. So now I'm going to give a little introduction to Jared Bryson. So Dr. Jared Bryson is the co-founder of Firebrand Plus, a Catholic executive and organizational coaching ministry that helps people and organizations move from maintenance to mission. He also serves as the Vice President, Mission and Church Relations for Mercy, the sixth largest Catholic health system in the United States. He and his wife, Emily, have 3 children, Augustine, Lillian, and William. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Organizational Development from Greenville College, a Master of Divinity from Aquinas Institute of Theology, and a Doctor of Ministry in Christian Spirituality from Washington Theological Union. He has served for the past 25 years in parish, diocesan, seminary, Catholic healthcare, Catholic education, as well as retreat and spiritual direction of ministries. Currently, he is serving as the Vice President of the St. Meinrad Alumni Association Board of Directors. Dr. Bryson will present on what we can learn from this pandemic and how it can shape the way ministry goes forward for the Catholic Church. We're so glad to have him, especially knowing that he's a vice president of the board and does a great job leading that group of individuals and leaders for the association. Hope that everyone watching live and later enjoys his presentation. Jared.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Greatly appreciate the introduction there and the invitation to share some thoughts and observations from my work as a Catholic executive and ministry coach. But, I just want to start from the low expectation delivery model is, my hope is that what I share is just a word on a page in a much larger chapter of a much larger book for our church's growth. Of note, what I'm going to talk about today are various calls to actions that are not meant to be definitive. However, they are observations from my experience with consulting with parishes, schools, and other ministries, and working with pastors and bishops and chancellors and other pastoral staff members and kind of walking through this transition time. So I'm going to just kind of ask you to pause for a moment and call to mind an image in particular. There on March 27th of 2020, in a place where thousands usually gather to catch the glimpse and hear the words of hope from our pontiff, stood a solitary figure in St. Peter's Square. Pope Francis, grappling with the conditions of a pandemic, offered prayer and supplication to God on behalf of all of humanity in the extraordinary Urbi et Orbi blessing. Millions watched as normal. However, all those who joined in prayer joined virtually. The experience of this prayer service was moving, and it stood in stark contrast to most papal liturgies in which there were crowds of people in which the Pope Mobile had to just kind of get through. It became a crystallizing moment for us in terms of what I think the future ministry could be for the church. Now, even as some churches begin to reopen or have been open and close and reopen again and resume public masses, we must recognize that the church is not getting back to normal anytime soon. Yes, there's a lot of issues around the pandemic and getting a vaccine and trying to get back on, but there's a lot that's going to change and happen even with the vaccine that will not get us back to normal. One of the things that I think will happen is if we're always focused on getting back to normal, we will be the churches that will be missing some of the biggest revelations from this time of what I've borrowed from somewhere else. It's called the Great Reset. While we're all wondering about the long-term impact of the pandemic on our spiritual life and on evangelization, we also have a lot of short-term reality of the church's institutions that are also at stake. The Great Reset has called to truly create a paradigm shift. Thanks, Joe, for putting that image up. To create a paradigm shift in missionary discipleship. That is, how do we help get out and as people who follow, call, and share Jesus with others? What's that gospel proclamation? So while this call existed prior to the current pandemic, this pandemic has also uncovered for us new opportunities, new questions, new audiences, and a new hunger. Like the pre-COVID times, church communities that were not focused on missionary discipleship and that were not focused on outreach continue to falter and eventually cease to exist in many places. With the migration of peoples, the challenges to keep up with who was in their community became much more critical. However, in this new context with the pandemic, a lot of the things that were going on in the church, that timeline has been accelerated. There have been many studies pointing to the decline, on average about 2.2%, according to CARA, of the U.S. Catholic population. While the global Catholic population continues to increase, the U.S. Catholic population continues to decrease. However, in this post-COVID world, or this middle of moment of it, with the increase in deaths, and the contributing to the decline, it does contribute to the decline of our Catholic population, it mainly leads from that having a significantly older population. It's estimated, according to one demographer for the church, that 40% of Catholics in the United States who attend Mass weekly are over the age of 70, compared to just 20% of the population as a whole. Now, the slowdown also in immigration because of COVID and the growing disaffiliation and lapsation, it continues to increase because of many times, sometimes the lack of outreach, and now the lack of weekly practice. The concern for the U.S. church that's in the decline is not just a time of the COVID crisis, but also because there are no new entrants. There's no immigration coming on, really happened in some of the areas because it's been slowed down, but also because of the demographic shifts in age and retention, all of which could be accelerated, or in some cases have been, in the COVID, post-COVID environment. The Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, CARA, on their blog recently posted this quote, and I'll read it out here. Understand the decline of new entrants is essential. This is a dynamic that's happening at the level of the family where it meets the parish community. Something is disconnected. Trends and retention rates are also troubling. The median age of young Catholics who are leaving the faith is 13, and about half are joining another religion, and the other half have no affiliation. They asked the question, is this a canary in the coal mine? And their answer is no. Because honestly, globally, the church continues to grow, and the United States only represents less than 6% of the world's Catholics. Now, I know that likes to shift us a little bit in how we feel about where we stand in the world. But what we've described is kind of the current view of the data of this country. And CARA also puts forward a few hypotheses that come out of this conversation, of which I ascribe to in this, and I want to kind of just slightly shift a little bit in the ordering. Generally speaking, these trends are also likely because of the other affiliations. It's happening in other denominations, so that makes it a broader approach. And the shifts between popular culture, the economy, the family, and then to come back to the iGen generation of technology. The global pandemic continues to shift our culture, the family, the economy, and technology. And the framework that I'm operating out of right now with a lot of my consulting group and working with parishes and schools and other ministries has really to change the different of the priority of the ordering. While they're all intertwined, I believe that one is having much more of an effect on others and requires it to be listed first. That is technology. So today I want to talk through just 4 little observations that I've seen and give some sort of thought about them around technology, around culture, around family and economy. I think these focal points in the church will help us with the paradigm shift, but also prepare us to move forward. Earlier today, we heard from Father Dennis around the work of Cardinal Newman, and today I'm going to borrow a little bit also from Cardinal Newman. So Father Dennis can critique me later if I get it right or not. But at the same time, as I've seen this, the global pandemic has affected every aspect of humanity. No matter if we ourselves have contracted the COVID-19 virus, know someone who did, or someone who's recovered, or someone who's died from it, this pandemic has altered, if you will, offered up our relationships with others. The pandemic continues to offer us up a moment of transformation for all of us in humanity. It's led us to a real experience of community through our loss of community. It's provided a new experience of sacramentality without access to sacraments. Ultimately, it has led to new expressions to embody the faith through virtual and or digital unembodied expressions. In the Second Vatican Council's dogmatic constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, it reminds us that the nature of the Church is sacrament, a sign and instrument, that is, of communion with God and the unity among people. Pope Francis, in his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, reminds us that the journey of missionary discipleship begins with our encounter with Christ, a moment that offers us up and transforms our lives. For, he says, if we have received the love which restores meaning to our lives, how can we fail to share that love with others? Discipleship is an experience of the love of Christ. Christian love is not practiced in order to evangelize, but we also shouldn't be naive about the whole such witness has always that evangelization has played in preparing the way. A professor of mine, the late Dominican Father Paul Philibert, relays in his book, The Priesthood of the Faithful, Keys to Living Church, a helpful conceptual tool that comes from John Henry Newman. The distinction becomes between the notional and the real. So for Newman, the notional assent is superficial and abstract, little more than assertions made out of habit, kind of what I'm giving out here in this conversation today. If the notional assent means saying yes to an idea, then the real assent means saying yes to something we've actually experienced. So Newman calls us to cultivate a spirituality of resilience and perseverance. The global pandemic has provided us an experience to make real, concrete assent for advancing the church. With this context in mind, let's go back to those 4 categories presented by Kara, and I just want to kind of highlight some of the observations that I've seen. So technology. Heidi Campbell, in her article, Distancing Religion Online, Lessons from the Pandemic Prompted by Religious Move Online, references 3 ways that churches moved online. The first was to transfer. That is, they attempted to replicate what they do in person and just put it online. The second was translation. They adapted certain elements of their worship to respond to their own constraints, creating challenges in building community and engagement. And the third was transformation, where they embraced the technology and what it could facilitate to build community and true connectivity over feelings of isolation. It was about meeting needs of their people practically and engaging with them. Now, we saw this as you went through the world. We saw this with even some of our own alums. I had the privilege of kind of peeking in through Facebook Live or Instagram Live and those places where our alums would have Theology Uncorked or fireside chats on Facebook Live or Instagram, where they fielded questions not just from their parishioners who submitted them in the chat, but from people all around the United States, Catholic, Protestant, seekers, and non-believers. Recalling that moment from Pope Francis standing in St. Peter's Square all alone, leading and praying on our behalf, it also inspired a group of priests and bishops to join in a virtual 40 hours welcoming the faithful into their home chapels and churches, giving inspiration, reflection, joining in prayer and adoration. Now, leave the theological question alone for right now about virtual adoration and understanding how we understand community. What was clear in the witness of that virtual adoration, because it was 40 hours, and there were people all over the globe that were involved, the community behind the scenes, the community that was leading the prayers, and then the community that was a watching. What was clear was the witness of the virtual adoration led to a greater sense of community and communion within those who participated. It also led to an inside look into the riches of our tradition. You know, I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and I don't get a lot of sleep. And so one night during the 40 hours time period, I was up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I put my 2-year-old back to bed, and I just, by habit, grabbed my phone, checked, make sure I had no messages. I looked and I scrolled on Facebook, and there at the 40 hours was a friend of mine, a bishop that I work with, who was leading the virtual prayer for 40 hours. It was a moving moment to see in the intimate moment of the home chapel, the prayer and the reflection, to be invited into that moment. Now, it wasn't just I was an observer looking on, but it pulled me in. It drew me closer to that Eucharistic moment and also to the moment of time of reflection. Now, later I texted that bishop, not at 1 o'clock in the morning, but I texted him the next day and said, "Thank you for your reflection last night. I heard it meant a world to me. It was great. Thanks for participating in this." It's this use of virtual environment that many times has been an afterthought for us in pastoral ministry for most of our churches prior to 2020. What the pandemic has revealed to us is the call to embrace technology as a digital first strategy for encounter and for evangelization. The digital strategy needs to connect to a personal reality of outreach, connecting people, caring for them spiritually as well as materially. And as a church, we need to speak as a unified voice in the digital space. What's also happened in this digital space has been a lot more polemics and vitriol of Catholics of various persuasions that has also caused a hurt in the church. So we need to help find a unifying and universal voice of welcome, of outreach, of inspiration, of beauty, goodness, and leading them to the truth. Evangelization involves hearts, hands, and heads. But most importantly, it also involves providing access to our way of life. Not just the spiritual, but also the social and the material. It involves a way of encountering and connecting. So the digital world is a visual space, which allows us to reveal the beauty of our faith to the fringes, to effectively reach the unaffiliated, and to shift that to a digital first mentality becomes foundational to the future of our efforts for both pre-evangelization, evangelization, and re-evangelization. Not simply transferring or translating our faith to the world while necessary. It's rather allowing it to do what Christ came to do, to transform our world. So when I think about technology and a call to action, going back to Newman's categories, the notional assent, the idea of developing a framework for new means of social communication and what it looks like to see virtual and digital means of social communication as an avenue of pre-evangelization, evangelization, and re-evangelization, to theologically reflect on the lived technological experience, how we align the digital world, the marketing sales funnel, if you will, with the human needs of pre-evangelization, evangelization, and re-evangelization. But the real assent, the concrete reality, calls us to, as communities, to redesign our online presence, to create a digital strategy that addresses those needs of those three groups of pre-evangelization, evangelization, and re-evangelization, to connect them to a larger church, to other parishes and communities that we have in our area, to even develop curated pathways utilizing all means of social communication to develop a personalized approach to the evangelization efforts in a way that's overtly personal and leads them to community and engages them with people in carrying both the material and the spiritual. How about a job board? What about virtual networking events, email outreach, or social media? Live stream masses have been good, but so is digital advocacy, joining together with the Universal Church Online. What if parishes came together to hire a digital minister? And because it's digital, it can be shared at expense amongst other parishes and coordinate the efforts. Those are just some ideas that come out in the technological things that I've seen in the observations. The second is on culture. So those of us who grew up in an era prior to cell phones and the internet had to find our news from printed newspapers, radios, television, and the limited channels that we have on TV, plus our neighbors. Actually, when I came to the Hill, I had a big, huge, large bag phone that, I had to take an antenna and walk out down to the parking lot and stand up to see if I get a signal. We were limited to geographic community where we lived, and our communications was not that fast. Most of our news was a broadcast method that is just kind of scattered widely, and not necessarily self-tailored news feeds that we see today. The move to digital, while helpful to providing new ways for information, for outreach and community building, also ushers in a growing cultural shift that we've already seen. It's not necessarily to a more individual one, but we need to pivot and reframe our response. This shift is occurring, it's actually a broadening one. It broadens our understanding of the age-old gospel question of, who is my brother or sister? The shift in community is less geographic. People build communities in new ways, some completely virtual. The shift in culture, moving to a virtual setting, gives us an opportunity to develop a more contemplative spirit. This is an opportunity for us as church. This is a strength for us to, again, tap into the richness of our tradition, to help people in the journey of life, of contemplation and action. So why be silent in such a noisy world? There's Robert Moore says, being overly, I wrote it down here, overly filled creates a chronic incapacity to achieve delight. It's a hope for us that even in this moment, while I'm giving a talk, it's a lot of noise, creating a lot of noise. It's my hope that from our time as church, we can come to find from our own moments of silence and contemplation, we may have an invitation for us to create opportunities for silence in the day for others. Our world has gotten so noisy. We cannot hear the depths of our heart. We cannot hear the voice of God, the cry of the poor, the love of the beloved, or the call of our lives. To be in silence is not just to be quiet, but also just not to respond to the sounds or thoughts from within. To be silent becomes a search in the heart, because in silence, there's an opportunity for God to speak in a way that we can hear. Silence and solitude will be an answer for our world, yet it's the thing that our world fights the most against. And this time of pandemic, the Great Reset, has been an opportunity to rethink our lifestyles. Once we have an experience of inner silence, we're drawn to the same time more closely to serve the needs of others. And sometimes to increase that level of silence once we find a way to befriend it. That's where we come in as church. We help folks to be able to befriend that moment of silence. Issues that we've previously ignored, that have always been there before. But our shift to silence and solitude in this crisis time has forced us to confront those issues. A few months of empty churches has enlivened the church. We are experiencing a resurgence of people seeking spiritual direction and spiritual companionship, many through virtual means, including the growth when we think about virtual retreats online and faith formation groups. The increased silence and contemplation is also presenting a growth in spiritual questions, spirituality, examining the meaning and purpose and the contemplative life that continues to increase dramatically, but it's also leaving people fearful, not able to know how to navigate this world. This is where we can have an opportunity. While not silent, utilizing YouTube's autoplay feature or Google search algorithm to the advantage of evangelization can create contemplative stances for us. There have been some cases, it's been documented at least, that YouTube autoplay algorithm has led people to watch videos from various priests or bishops, even one written in Bishop Barron's book about someone coming to the faith by watching some of his talks. So in culture, our call to action comes from a notional assent. We can frame a theological understanding of community, the absence of physical presence. We can write and create those case studies around the spiritual health and benefits of silence, contemplative life, or prayer. But in a real assent, to find ways to develop online, virtual, and digital tools to aid in creating spaces for silence, for contemplation, and for prayer. To develop tools to help people address those spiritual questions that are arising within them. To find ways to help them befriend silence. To utilize the richness and the beauty of our tradition while letting the spiritual questions come from the person in front of you to direct what we develop, versus creating programs that we want to deliver that may or may not have an audience on the other side. Develop spiritual companioning or direction and outreach for the seeker of those spiritual questions. This leads me to my third observation in this transition, has been around the family. In Familiaris Consortio, Pope John Paul II reminds us that the future of humanity passes by way of the family. The continuing shift in family life, my own family life even, saw growth and saw stress. Also saw development and major setbacks during this pandemic. Many families saw their parents either work from home, lose jobs, enter the workforce under precarious conditions. My own family, my wife works at a hospital, I work for a health system, and I got sent home. She had to go into the hospital, yet our kids got sent home as well. So the opportunity for us to shift around meant that she was taken care of during the week while I was working during the week, and then on the weekends, she went to work while I took care of the kids during the week. It became a real bit stressful time for us. But think about the single parents who wrestle with this and all these challenges and many more, but with greater intensity. Either way, with all the other activities halted overnight, life slowed down for the most part. As families have been able to spend more time together, they were also able to grow together, develop spiritually, find new things, build community, and work through relationship challenges, although it also caused new challenges and new stresses. If anything, the pandemic has enabled families to develop their own domestic church, an issue that we've previously ignored sometimes. We've talked about it. We put it's in our documents. We moved to it. We have a notional assent to that. But it takes all of us, single, married, divorced, religious, clerics, to help the domestic church, to transmit and transform our faith. How do we help the next generation in that conversation? As the world begins to continue reopen, what will it mean for this recent progress in the domestic church? Will families allow themselves the space to continue this path of domestic growth? Can we continue as church to support them, to find new avenues? Or will they rush back to the new normal in which there's 3 soccer games every morning and wherever else they got to go? Perhaps it's not all worth rushing back to, but we haven't given them always something to hold on to. Digital discipleship and missionary discipleship is also truly enabling others to live the Christian life as a primary community. While previously we measured our growth in the church through metrics of baptism and marriages, and they're valid measures, and they're ones we want to continue to measure, these metrics are no longer the sole measure of success of our ministry. Do we create disciples? We need to develop new metrics around engagement, how relationships are being transformed, how we provide value to the ways in which the domestic church exists. How do we help create discipleship? The value described here must be a value provided by the needs for the community that we serve, and not by what we want to know or do. So the move to online has allowed us to find the opportunity to just kind of rethink this, to understand the needs of our people. The communities we live in, they can be seen through these developmental needs, both that we see in Facebook survey groups or digital date nights. They help us with the resources for the daily spiritual life. So the call to action for family in terms of a notional assent. Come to understand the needs of the families that you serve. Find the opportunities to be with them, no matter what the structure looks like. Create dialogue to understand the life and the structure of the families. That real assent, we could have used tools when we were going through some part of the things around enabling the growth of domestic church. What does it look like? What do those tools look like in terms of the outreach? Those strategies versus making programs that require us to go to the church building, but how do we keep church into our own homes and domestic buildings? build marriages and family life through those virtual and digital means. And the last to kind of leave with is I wanted to talk about briefly on the economy. It's clear the pandemic has shifted everyone's encounter with the economy. How we provide a living for ourselves and our families, it continues to shift and change. The workforce of the future also continues to change. This has accelerated a gig economy and remote work, the culture of our workplaces. These shifts in work can be very positive, enabling people to find better integration of work and life that aligns with their overall vision of their own family life and happiness. However, the pandemic has also shown vulnerability in our economic models, especially within our Catholic ministries. How parishes and schools and other ministries will survive and or thrive during these times of economic challenge must be addressed. How we come together and support our communities is the foundation of our ministry outreach. The Catholic Church is the largest charitable outreach ministry in the United States. The loss of traditional funding and fundraisers has presented a great challenge for many. I'm mindful that in the growth of education, health, and social services, here in the United States, there were once practical outreach of the Catholic Church in our communities. They were founded to take care of the poor and the vulnerable, the Catholics and other than. Yet over time, there's been shifts, both mainly economically, in who has access to these outlets. This great reset is a prime opportunity to go back to our roots, to work together to think systemically, and to reset our operating and economic models for ministry. For Catholic education, the current tuition-based model of funding Catholic education does not become sustainable. To achieve both high academic excellence, faith formation and spiritual formation, Catholic identity, and to be able to invest in the education programming excellence, to hire and retain faculty, to increase enrollment and sustain financial viability, and to suggest that new business and operating models for Catholic schools, it has to be considered. But this also comes out in this pandemic as we see schools that may not reopen in the fall. Operating models that can try to invest in growth and development while the workforce continues to shift and change, not being able to afford it, to create new opportunities to serve our community and to retain and recruit faculty, staff, students, and to increase our Catholic identity and ministry. These are great opportunities. I don't have any answers to them, just observations, questions that I see being brought up at this point in time. We've witnessed the ministry of the world creatively to replace those traditional fundraisers. I even had one parish who had a big, huge fundraiser set up, and they had to go all virtual. They raised more by going virtual than they ever would have in their face-to-face one. What was their strategy? How did they work to that? But it only was a few places that I've seen do that. So there's lots of opportunity for growth. So the call to action for economy is really to create new operating and economic models for our ministries that allow people to be served regardless of their ability to pay. The real ascent then becomes to work to create that economy that lifts those out on the margins and makes available Catholic ministries and education, healthcare, and other services we provide, that create an opportunity to close the income inequality and racial gaps, develop new operating and financial models for Catholic ministries, including our parishes and schools. I spent most of my time these past few days all on Zoom calls with parishes and schools, trying to really figure out how they open up in the fall. The really time for us is to find a commitment to real ascent, advancing the call that Pope Francis calls for us. I want to just kind of leave with one quote from Pope Francis, a little long, but I'm going to read it real quick. He says in Evangelii Gaudium, "In our day, Jesus' command to go and make disciples echoes in the challenging scenarios and ever new challenges to the church's mission of evangelization. And all of us are called to take part in this new missionary going forward. Each Christian and every community must discern the path that the Lord points out. But all of us are asked to obey his call to go forth from our own comfort zone in order to reach all the peripheries in need of the light of the gospel. I dream of a missionary option that is the missionary impulse capable of transforming everything, so that the church's customs, ways of doing things, times and schedules, language and structures can be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world rather than for her self-preservation. The renewal of structures demanded by pastoral conversion can only be understood in this light. And as part of an effort to make more mission-oriented, to make ordinary pastoral activity on every level more inclusive and open, and to inspire pastoral workers on a constant desire to go forth. This is the way to elicit a positive response from all those whom Jesus summons to friendship with himself. The parish is not an outdated institution because it possesses great flexibility. It calls for us to be a church in the midst of homes of her sons and daughters. This presumes that really we are in contact with those homes and the lives of the people, and does not become useless structure out of touch with the self-absorbed cluster made up of a few chosen. Pastoral ministry and a missionary key seeks to abandon the complacent attitude that says, we have always done it this way. So thank you for your time and attention. I welcome any questions and comments, and I see some that have popped up here in the comment box. Let's see if I can pull them up here. There we go. Maybe. So from Roger, our experience with digital technology has kept our family, Northern California, Southern California, Indianapolis, Indiana, and our Catholic Church family gathered together more now than we can physically be together. COVID mandated isolation March 14th. Absolutely. Carmelite Sisters Sacred Heart Retreat House in Alhambra, California has become a virtual through Zoom. Their masses on Facebook from their chapel with the singing voices of the sisters, other experiences via Zoom or Vimeo. So many more options than we could have ever been capable geographically. Good things of God coming through this disease of man. I agree with that conversation. That's absolutely. Thank you for that, Roger. Richard writes, church as we know it has been a model ingrained in the Industrial Revolution. Now we're entering the autonomous revolution, technology, a world where AI is going to impact the social nature of society. Now, where do we see the technology reclaiming our spiritual community of action and contemplation? So does the pandemic accelerate to adoption of autonomous technology? Do we begin to see Christ in technology, Christ in the virtual? Those are great questions. Let me just see if I can. Where do I see the technology reclaiming our spiritual community of action and contemplation? If I understand that question right, I think the opportunity for us that we see reclaiming the spiritual community has really been in the focus of trying to build networks and communities of people of prayer. How that plays out, the content-rich environment that we are in today that leads people to prayer has been a great opportunity to see that. I've seen a lot of retreat centers and a lot of places of worship doing that. Does the pandemic accelerate the adoption of autonomous technologies? Yes. As a matter of fact, it's accelerated in many industries right now of autonomous technologies. And the AI that has been developed right now in many places causes some other challenges that we have to kind of think through also from a theological and ethical standpoint. Do we begin to see Christ in technology, Christ in the virtual? Yeah, I'll leave that to other greater minds than mine. I think that could give us a conversation that would not be in the right place where I would want to be. I think Christ shows up in the creator of the technology. Maybe not so much in the technology, but it could be mediated through it. I don't know. I'm not really put much thought to that. I'm sorry. And then Gary in Louisville, Kentucky, our parish has designated our live stream efforts as ministry of the parish. Our choir is doing a Zoom rehearsal for members. Our Gather the Children weekly formation from your ones is virtual. That's fantastic. I love hearing that as a ministry going on. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts? I'll wait a few seconds here as there's a little bit of a delay in the chat feature. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and attention, and grateful for the opportunity to present today. Hopefully these are helpful. I'll leave my contact information in the chat box for anyone in the future to reach out and have conversations about whatever was on your mind that you had that I may have presented. Questions, comments, rebuttals, pious indignations. I'm happy to have all those conversations in the future. Thanks so much. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the reunion. God bless.